Welcome to Live, Work, Thrive. I'm Michaela Birmingham, Scary Mommy executive producer, and I will be the moderator for tonight's panel on money, sex, and happiness. Now, if that is not the trifecta we are all after, I don't know what is. Tonight, we've gathered an expert panel to help us work through the life-changing impacts of having children and how to thrive in the midst of all the chaos. We will be talking everything from finance to romance, so you're going to want to stick around. Specifically, tonight we will discuss what is sexy about spending, saving, and investing, how to stop fighting about money with your partner, how to be savvy about tax status after kids or changing jobs, and what the pandemic has taught us about our jobs. Of course, we will be taking questions from our live audience throughout the show, so send us those comments. Let's meet our panelists. Tonight, we have with us Angela Garbes, who is the author of a book coming out this May called Essential Labor, Mothering as Social Change. You can pre-order that book right now. And her first book, Like a Mother, was an NPR Best Book of the Year. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Cut, Bon Appetit, and many others. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Angela.
Thank you so much for having me, Michaela.
Also with us is Amanda Clayman. Amanda is a financial therapist who specializes in the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral aspects of our financial well-being. She is also reoccurring on the episodes of Death, Sex, and Money, a podcast by WNYC. So check out Amanda there. Her work has been featured in The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, and The Today Show. Amanda, thank you for joining us again on Live, Work, Thrive.
Thanks, Michaela.
Later on in the show, we will also hear from Lisa Greene-Lewis. Lisa has over 20 years of experience in tax preparation, and she specializes in helping clients save money at every life stage. Lisa has appeared on the Steve Harvey Show and the Ellen Show. So listen, we got a big, badass group of mamas here tonight with us who are going to help us with the trifecta: money, sex, and happiness. Before we get started, I have a quick few reminders for our live audience. You can submit your comments wherever you're watching, and we may feature your question later on the show, as I mentioned. So hit us up in the comment section. You can join our mailing list so you don't miss any of the upcoming virtual events we have in store. Visit scarymommy.com/liveworkthrive to sign up and stay in touch. You can also now leave us a voicemail. This is my favorite thing. It's very old school, but the hotline is very hot right now. So call us. Tell us what you're struggling with or what topics you'd like to see on the show. Here's the number, 1-800-422-3910. Or you can just call me and say hi. You know, it's a pandemic still. We'd like to talk. Hot off the press, we have a dedicated Instagram account. Stay in the know and be the first to find out all the scoop with Live, Work, Thrive on IG. So let's get into tonight's topic. Amanda, let's talk money. Okay, this is your bread and butter. Is money a subject that can lay dormant in a relationship until a couple reaches a new life stage and then suddenly, bam, major differences of opinion and things get all out of whack? How do you prevent a surprise money drama from cropping up unexpectedly?
So I'll answer the first part of the question first, which is how common is it? And yes, it's very, very common, because a lot of times we can think of different life stages as we kind of figure out what works in a particular life stage. And then we can recognize a new life stage because all of a sudden the things that were working just fine suddenly are not sufficient for the new needs and challenges that we're encountering. So how do we not get surprised by those things? Well, I'm afraid we really can't. That's kind of our good old human desire to control and avoid trouble. But in fact, we can learn a lot and we can discover new levels of intimacy when we encounter conflict around money, disagreement, all of that stuff, because this is where we use our relationship with our spouse to sort of discover these parts of ourselves that we may not have really been in touch with before. So I don't tend to think of conflict as a bad thing. I just think that we can learn how to do conflict in a more productive kind of a way.
Okay, so when you have a little friction, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I like that point of view. So let's talk a little bit about how, these points of conflict can be a little different for women than they are for men. And while I was preparing for tonight's talk, I did a little reading and I found something that surprised me. And that is with respect to the 1974 Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which was passed in 1974. And at the time, it was aimed at prohibiting credit discrimination on the basis of gender. But come to find out, before this, it was very hard for women who were married to not be tied, essentially linked to their husbands when it comes to credit cards and bank accounts. Amanda, explain this, because I almost like flipped the table when I saw that it's only been 48 years since I could walk in and get my own credit card. We are not making this up. What went on in the past?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So the sort of legal rights for women journey has been just that. It's been a journey. And even though we got the right to vote in 1920, still there was a lot of kind of legacy, social and institutional inertia, if you will. So previously, women had been sort of legally part of what was called coverture, meaning that you are legally covered by your husband, your spouse, or even before you are grown by your father. I mean, it was kind of the patriarchy writ large. And so what that Credit Act did was that it eliminated a lot of kinds of discrimination, but it also, it kind of addressed what were obvious problems with not letting women have access to their own banking and credit products. You know, if you had a job, you did not control your own income. If you were widowed, you wouldn't be able to assume ownership of an account or open your own account. So we had a few kind of catch-up steps there to get to legislatively for women to be able to be on anything even approaching equal footing with men financially.
So thankfully, I mean, we've got the basics now, but I still feel like we have a distance to go. So, Angela, when it comes to earning careers, financial independence, is it fair to say that we're still sort of at a historical disadvantage that we're working to overcome just to get to baseline with men? Can you explain a little bit about why this is?
I mean, 100%. I think the pandemic has made that so clear. You know, the workforce, women in the workforce were, you know, at record high numbers before the pandemic. And then there are like 2 million less women in the paid workforce, because women and mothers are doing a lot of unpaid labor in the home. But people left the workforce in droves because people were impacted by service industries where women and women of color specifically are overrepresented in like retail and restaurant industry. Those businesses closed, some of them never to return. You know, and if I know that this of employment for women that are like from the 1980s. Right. So that's important to keep in mind. And also, I'd like to say in September of 2020, when schools remained closed, 865,000 women, I was going to repeat that, 865,000 women dropped out of the professional workforce in 1 month. And that's because we are expected to be educators, childcare providers, professional workers, and caregivers all at once. So while we were making progress, you can say it's clear that when infrastructure fell apart, you know, and we don't have a social safety net, we have mothers, right? It was called upon, mothers were asked to do that. And so we really see how that progress, which was so hard won, kind of fades away very quickly. And it's still true that there is the gender pay gap. You know, that is women make, I bet maybe Amanda knows the actual number. I want to say it's something like 67 cents to a man's dollar. It's a significant.
It depends on which group of women we're looking at. It varies from, I think, like 59 maybe for Latinas and up to 74 for white women. But that's just off the top of my head.
Right. So, but off the top of our head, we know that there's a huge pay discrepancy. We also know that, you know, pre-pandemic, women leave the workforce on a regular, in and out of the workforce, not just because they have children. I mean, I think we're probably most all familiar with that. The decisions that come after you have a child and whether or not it's worth it to go back to work when childcare is so expensive. But also, women are expected to be caretakers in their family. If my parents were to get sick, you know, women leave the workforce, people even who don't have children, they're in and out of the workforce and coming back to often lower wages. And that's because we are caretakers. So yes, we still have a long way to go.
For sure. And you hit on caretaking and childcare is certainly a huge piece of that we're going to get to in a minute, because I feel like there's so many considerations for, you know, starting a family and families with kids to think about with respect to that. And so, you know, Amanda, when we talk about women as caretakers, this can start to filter through to other areas of a relationship. I could just think about, that old saying of like, how can you be tired? You've been home. You stayed home all day. I've been out there working hard and you've just been home all day. Why is that kind of problematic to a relationship where, there's actually a lot of work that goes on when you may be taking care of someone, doing homeschooling or remote learning with a child, all of those things that we saw so clearly right before us during the past, time of upheaval that we've all experienced.
And well, one thing that we can think about is a lot of those housekeeping or caretaking responsibilities are invisible unless something goes wrong. So the only time we're really noticing the labor that's involved and the effort is when there aren't groceries at home because someone didn't have time to buy them or somebody forgot to sign a permission slip. Not that anybody's been going anywhere recently, but those kinds of tasks. Funny aside, I was watching a movie this week from 1994, and it was Clear and Present Danger with Harrison Ford. And they're in a 2-career household. The wife is a doctor in these films. And yet I watched it, and you never see the father, the Harrison Ford character, doing any of the caretaking responsibilities. So even as recently as the 1990s, and I'm sure that was not the last film, are kind of like visible representation of who's doing these jobs, we still associate those tasks with women. And I think that, we can't count out the effect of that kind of cultural norm or cultural programming and telling us whose jobs these kinds of tasks are.
For sure. Did you want to add to that, Angela?
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, this is like, it is a lot of what my new book is about. Like the book is called Essential Labor, and that essential labor refers to mothering and caretaking. Oxfam did a study that if you were to pay women around the world minimum wage for the domestic labor that they currently do not get paid for, it would be worth $10.9 trillion. Just going to let that settle in, and we expect caregiving. I mean, we live in a capitalist society, and that relies on domestic labor to be done for free, right? But capitalism depends on work that occurs in the home. I mean, this idea that I'm tired from working out in the world, like I'm sure that's true. The home does not maintain itself. Clothes don't wash themselves, dishes don't wash themselves. The toilet doesn't scrub dried poop from the inside by itself. I wish that it did. But all of these things they're considered, women's work. They're expected to be done for free, like a labor of love. We've all heard that phrase before, and if we are lucky to be able to outsource, if we're fortunate enough to be able to outsource some of that work, oftentimes we outsource that labor to women of color who are domestic laborers, house cleaners, nannies. And those women make, close to poverty wages. The median wage in the United States is close to $20 an hour. It's closer to 12 for domestic workers. So at every level, we devalue this work. And it's time for us to see it as what it is, which is skilled labor. That is the infrastructure. It's the work that makes all other work possible. I have some feelings about this.
For sure. And I mean, I feel like that, just thinking about everyday couples, that can manifest itself in, some friction. I mean, I'm going to add to your list of, you mentioned the dishwasher and the toilet. There's also like the little catch basin in the sink where all the spaghetti noodles fall and the bits of the sandwich that someone like dropped in the sink. No, the mom doesn't have to always be the one to empty that thing. I just want to put that out there into the world. Okay. Because I feel like if I just didn't experiment and didn't empty that thing in my sink for like 4 months, like there would be a mountain in there and nobody would touch it. Anyway, that's a different show.
It's 100% true. And it is true in my house. So I just want to say that.
People out there listening, go find the nearest household with a mom and empty her little sink thing today. Do us a favor.
My husband does step up and do that one because it's so gross to me.
Oh, well, good for you.
I'm over
listen.
here going like this. Oh my goodness, that's so amazing. Like the
job.
expectation.
You have to give them a parade now.
It's sort of the
System
least he
is
could do.
different.
Yeah, you don't get points for emptying the sink drain.
I feel like you probably have a bit of a leg up as a therapist, like the strategies to manifest that behavior. I want that tip later. But I think this leads us nicely to our TurboTax moment. Here's where we ask the Scary Mommy community to tell us about the biggest money beef they have had with their partner. I want to read you a couple of the responses that we received. On Dream 4 says, never remembering bills on time. I constantly have to ask what is due. Also, Must Be Jelly says, my money is our money and his money is his money. My car is our car and his car is his car. I don't know where he banks and I don't have keys to his car, but he uses my debit card at will and he has keys to my car. Yikes. So, Amanda, I feel like this is, a classic case of we have an Amanda Clayman 911 on our hands over here when we don't know where the keys are and somebody's car is used for their own private activities and the other car is where all the goldfish crackers and the Legos are getting dropped. So how does this couple, get back to baseline here?
Well, it's true. There are a lot of red flags there. And I'll point out that a lot of these behaviors that we can see when it comes to couples, there's a range. There are some problems that are inconveniences that are the normal ways that people can disagree about things and maybe coordinate and find a better way. But then a lot of times these behaviors kind of go along the spectrum of severity into more things that become more like financial coercion, financial control behaviors, and even financial advice. And anytime that we see one partner who's being kind of marginalized with more of the responsibilities, who doesn't have as much power and access to resources or information as the other partner, that's a place where, going back to the kind of 5 conditions, this is where equality values are being sort of overtrod. It looks at inclusivity, whereas both partners should be making these financial decisions together. There are several things that I would look at for sure if this was a person who called me.
Okay, so let's say we had a beef brewing pre-kids. Once the child arrives, I feel like the beef gets more beefy, right? This, any sort of brewing problem is only going to be amplified once the next life stage hits us, right? So, Angela, let's talk childcare. We've mentioned this before, and the pandemic has basically shone a light on the fact that women do all this invisible work, right? Is there anything to be learned here? How can we recover from this crisis in a way that works better for parents? Because I feel like we're starting to hopefully try and resume some forms of normalcy. Schools are reopening, daycares are back in business for the most part in a lot of parts of the country. Are we going just to fall right back into where we left off, or are there things that we can think about as parents, as partners, as communities to help us not get back into that same old rut that we were in before that wasn't all that perfect?
Yeah. I feel like just as the pandemic has been sorry, I'm not supposed to move too much, but it's been an emotional wild ride, right? There was a time, that last summer when we were we're all vaccinated and we can come back out, and then we slide back. So I think there's great potential, and I think there's also potential to sort of backslide. And one of the things that made me hopeful was when we were doing direct stimulus payments to people, when we were giving people money because they weren't able to work in the same way, and the government was supporting people in that way and helping them. And then we had the advanced child tax credit, which was really helpful, which helps a lot of families and children get out of poverty for a short period of time, which gave some relief. But then while that was supposed to last for a calendar year, it has since expired. But so I think there is traction and there's momentum in our society for acknowledging that care work is legitimate work, and having children requires resources, and it's a shared resource. It's not just a lifestyle choice that parents have made and they're on their own forever to deal with it. But in the absence of that sort of governmental support, which right now we don't have, I think it's really I think it's important for us to talk about ourselves as these essential workers, and that's a major shift for people. We have again been conditioned, mothers and women especially, to be like, it all comes down to me, and like, I'll just do it because nobody else can do it right. Or when it comes down to it, it's people expect me to do this. And I think talking about it, whether that's to ourselves, to our partner, to our friends, is saying like, no, we are the people that have kept like society going, caring for children, caring for elders, caring for sick people. I think it really starts there. I think that's one place. And it's sort of nebulous. It says like we're trying to change the cultural conversation. But I think the more we start to identify as workers, like workers in a struggle, not mothers trapped at home with our individual miseries, I think it's a way that we can build some of that momentum and collective energy and action again. The other thing I just want to say is that there are already opportunities for solidarity that exist. There are organizations and people that are working for workers' rights and minimum wage for domestic workers, people who, again, are house cleaners and nannies who a lot of us rely on or who have had to rely on. And, we tend to think of ourselves as different from those workers. And we think of that as low, unskilled labor, which I personally think is a myth that is used to say that some people are more valuable than others. And I reject that. And I think that if we support protections and minimum wages and like a living wage for domestic workers who do this essential labor, that puts us in a position to demand those things for mothers, for stay-at-home mothers, right? When there is solidarity with workers who are doing this work, we have a way of those wins can be achieved for us too. We can be seen with that sort of respect. Maybe we can ask for wages and we can start to have protections as well.
For sure. And now I know you mentioned some tax credits. We're going to hear in a minute about some of the tax credits to be aware of once you have kids. But I wanted to first, as we're on this topic of childcare and caregiving, we're going to hear now from some folks from the Scary Mommy community who called in to tell us about the most stressful decision they have had to make after having kids. Here is a message from a caller named Dana, who's going to tell us about her childcare dilemma. Here she is.
Hi, this is Dana from Eastchester. The most stressful decision we had to make after having kids was figuring out childcare. With daycare costs being so high, we debated if it even made sense for me to go back to work at all. We considered asking a family member to help out, but we were worried that it can get too complicated, depending on them long term. So luckily, my partner was able to shift to a more flexible schedule, and we only needed part-time daycare so I can return to work full-time. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to afford it. Thank you. Bye.
So Amanda, why is childcare one of those financial expenses that kind of sneaks up on us? How do you budget for it? And like, when do you start planning? Is it like, should I be thinking about this at the baby shower, literally? Because I remember as a new mom getting the like bill from the daycare and like going, oh dear Lord, this is expensive. How do we think about that? And how early should that planning start?
I think that the reason that it's shocking is because no matter whether you're prepared for it or not, it is shockingly high. It seems, especially for new parents who have never had to really have anything close to that in their budgets before, you just feel like that cannot be correct. Like, how is that sustainable? And I don't think that we have an answer to that question. I think that it's wildly unaffordable, even while the wages for childcare workers are still low and hardly a living wage at all. So on the one hand, we've got parents who feel incredibly squeezed by the cost of it. And on the other hand, we have workers in these sectors who really aren't even able to meet their basic needs on the amount that they're getting paid. So it's a tough situation. And I would say that most of us just really have to have a pretty radical adjustment period. And it gets kind of folded in with all of the other things that feel very radical about new parenting. But parents are getting more savvy, more collaborative. We are finding solutions like the one that the caller had, where you find hopefully that one of if there are two partners, that one of them does have flexibility. We may find family help. We may do something creative like childcare co-ops. I think that people are really trying to test different models of childcare, but there are political reasons why we don't have universal childcare in this country to begin with. And part of that after World War II started with wanting to get women out of the workforce so that they would go home and free up jobs for male veterans who were returning from war. So like the personal is political, I would say nowhere more so maybe than in the childcare debate about affordability.
Well, it isn't all bad news. We actually do have some good news when it comes to having kids, people. And that starts with handing off your taxes to someone who knows about all the ways to make it work for you. I want to go now to Lisa Greene-Lewis, who's a CPA and tax expert with TurboTax, who specializes in helping families at every stage of life. And listening to her reveal all the tax credits that we may be eligible for after having kids was a real eye-opener for me. So let's take a listen to what Lisa has to say.
Tax-wise, the more kids you have, the bigger your benefits. So there's credits and deductions available. So there's a child tax credit available, and that's up to $3,600 for each of your kids under 6, and then up to $3,000 for each of your kids 6 to 17. And then the child and dependent care credit, that's huge. I know parents spend a ton of money on sending their kids to daycare, or it even qualifies for summer camp or even sports camps. So as long as you're sending your kids there so you can work, you may be able to get a credit up to $8,000 for 2 or more kids and $4,000 for 1 child. And then there's also the earned income tax credit. That's a huge credit, and it goes up the more kids you have. So a family with 3 kids, that credit is worth over $6,000. It's actually $6,728.
All right. So we do have some advantages, and it's important to always think, if you're looking at childcare, even camps and things like that, there are ways to at least recoup a little bit of that expenditure as a credit, which is good to know. So Angela, we talk about the mental load that women carry. So while we have all this struggle, we also have all the things that are going on in our minds, right? We got to remember the orthodontist appointment. We got to remember, the dog needs the heart pills this month. And we need to remember that, it's Mother's Day coming up, and you got to order the flowers for the person that's not even actually your mother, but you got to order for the partner's mother too, right? Mental load is a lot.
Yes.
Can the mental load destroy our libido? What do you think, Angela?
Yes, I think so. I don't want to say destroy. I like to think of it more as it can push it into a period of latency or dormancy, I guess. I think that's a really, we like to think that, I think I used to naively think that like my sex life was something that sort of existed outside of the realities of life. It was like a private thing. It was it's a very sensual, special thing. And what I found, especially after having kids, is that it's affected by all of these things. And I think we're kind of, I don't know what exactly people were taught about sex. I was taught very little from my parents, who were deeply Catholic. And then I was basically taught like, don't get pregnant and don't get an STD by the high school football coach, who was my high school sex ed teacher. I wasn't taught, anything about pleasure, right? I wasn't taught about how, I think for a long time I didn't really understand my sexuality, or didn't fully understand it, or kind of thought maybe like it's this one way, I'm this way. And I like very much what Amanda was talking about earlier about how, we go along with thinking that things are the way they are until suddenly they don't seem to be working anymore when we come to a life change. And I think that's like very true for our libido and sex drive. And there is nothing like having a child, not just the presence of the child, but for people who giving birth to a child, which changes your entire body and like how you feel about yourself. And I think it's really important to say like, these are moments where it shouldn't be seen as conflict. Like a decrease in sex drive can come back, right? And it's an opportunity to maybe let go of some of our ideas about sex. Like, I didn't know until a long time ago that sex really does not depend. It does not start and it does not end with an erect penis, right? Like, I think we're taught that, and that's not true, right? It's an opportunity to cultivate intimacy with our partners and to really talk about what makes us feel good, right? To think about sex outside of like, just like the penetrative, dominant sort of narrative that we're given, and realize that it's a place to, I think sex can be something that's much more beautiful and freeing when you let go of this idea that it has to be a certain way, and there will always be, like, you have a child and then maybe your sex drive comes back, and then maybe you have another child, and that sort of throws everything
and
off.
then maybe you have a pandemic, and then a
Right.
war, and then
Or
like a
maybe-
lot of other things.
Exactly.
Right?
Life just keeps coming at you, and
It
you have to
keeps
be
coming.
prepared to
For sure.
keep rewriting that script and how it works for you.
So in that reality that we're in, there's always going to be something, right? There's going to be whatever surprise down the road. Someone breaks an arm, someone's dog is in heat, someone's, got a flood, whatever it is. There's always something, right? Amanda, for couples with growing families, money obviously is tight. We've talked about that. We've talked about childcare. It's tough to find. How important is it to budget for that relationship with respect to even a simple date night or a weekend away without the kids? We know that there's never going to be this like perfect time when everybody's well rested and the house is clean and everyone's chill. I've been waiting and been married 20 years, haven't gotten to that weekend yet. So how important is it to set aside that time and in some cases even maybe budget for it to kind of reinvest into the relationship?
So this is where being deliberate and being intentional really comes into play. And it's true about our relationships. It's the approach that I take with clients when it comes to money or time or any of these things. Like, for example, a budget should be a tool of yes, and as much, well, more than a tool of no. This is our way of defining what our priorities are. And similarly with time or with the areas of our lives, the kind of like different sectors of our lives that we're paying attention to, we want to bring intentionality. We want to think about what it is that we need to say yes to. And then we need to think about this support structure that allows us to say yes to the things that are important. So where intimacy is important and that's a value for us, we need to think about things like, are we allocating time for this? Are we identifying things that tend to decrease our sense of intimacy, get in the way, like the areas of resentment that we might have with our partner? Like nothing, it feels less sexy than being mad at your partner and suddenly you're supposed to be intimate with them. Like, so we then sort of identify that as an issue that needs our attention and resolution. And by saying that these are the things that are important to us and not waiting for them to just naturally occur, like you said, the kind of mythical weekend, we put the intentionality there first, create those structures, and then we figure out what we need to say no to in order to protect our yeses.
Doesn't listening to her make you all think you need to sign up for a little therapy? Because I mean, she's got all the language, you guys. Yes. On that point, I want to hear now another voicemail from our Scary Mommy audience that ties in really nicely with Amanda's whole vibe of just like being intentional, which I love. Let's hear from a caller who called in to tell us what the most stressful decision she had to make in her life after having kids. This message is from Kimberly. Here she is.
Hey, my name is Kimberly. I am 36 years old. Since having kids, the most stressful decision we have ever made was whether or not to go to couples therapy. We both knew we needed it, but it was hard to admit it, even though we argued a lot. The thought of telling someone all the backstory seemed exhausting. After 1 year, we were so glad we went. Highly recommend to any couples who need some guidance getting back on track after their kids.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that idea of this feeling a little daunting, right? So Angela, I mean, I feel like, we've talked about all of these challenges that women have and how this can sometimes filter into our career advancement and our feelings of, being fulfilled, whether it's at home or outside of the home. How do you feel like couples therapy could sort of come in to support that woman in the struggle that she may be feeling?
I think the partnership is great and couples are great. I also would advocate for individual therapy because I think it kind of begins with us. And I want to acknowledge, as the caller said, I mean, I grew up in a household of, immigrants from the Philippines. Like, we did not talk about mental health, right? Therapy was literally something we were like, my parents once said, like, that's what white people do. Right? Like, life is hard. Everyone's depressed. Like, you just get on with it. You're sort of in survival mode. So I just want to acknowledge that to get to that step of deciding to pursue therapy for yourself or as a couple, it's not that easy for a lot of people. And there's also financial barriers that get there. But you really, to borrow some of Amanda's language, which I think I'll be doing for the rest of my life, to be intentional and to think about making an investment in yourself. Because I just really believe that, your children's health is important, your partner's health is important, but it really begins with you. And if you are not, like, we need you, the world needs you whole. And if you are not there, like, you're not going to be able to be there for your partner or your children in the way that you would like. And so I just, I think that it's really important to think about doing that. And I think when you start to care for yourself in that way, your life can improve in ways that at this point, like, you can't even imagine. Like, you're getting tools that will really help expand your life and your vision. And so I think that it can be beneficial in ways that you could go intentionally to solve a specific problem. But I also think you have to leave room for, like, sort of imagination that your life could just be better in ways that you couldn't even picture what they would be right now.
For sure. And
what Angela just said, is it possible to add a thought on top?
Yes, go ahead.
I think too, when it comes to couples, that one thing to be aware of is that there's often a partner who tends to do more of the emotional labor in the household, in terms of, like, being the one who kisses boo-boos, and listens to the other partner who needs to decompress at the end of the day, and kind of holds those feelings, gives language to those feelings. Like, the way that our genders are socialized right now is that men are really encouraged to be more shut down and containing of their feelings. But what often happens then when you get into a couple's dynamic is that the female spouse becomes a kind of de facto emotional support system for the husband. And that can be, again, a thing that really kills intimacy. If we feel like our function is just there to support other people, we probably don't feel supported. And so a good couples therapist, a good therapist can help individuals sort of look at what's going on there. And a good couples therapist can at least be a more neutral third party who's looking at how some of the patterns and relationship dynamics may be problematic, and suggesting something else. That doesn't mean you're rehashing everything that's ever happened to you that went on in your life or relationship before, but really to just go, okay, I see the dynamic that's happening here. Here are some ways that we can think about exploring alternatives.
That makes a lot of sense. And I feel like someone out there listening right now has chimed in to ask us, how do I get my husband in therapy himself, not as a couple? What do you recommend, Amanda?
The Fix My Spouse. I literally have that in my email reply to new client inquiries that says, like, I can't be in the business of telling the other spouse what to do, or the Fix My Spouse. It's tough. And we can really say there are a few different ways to approach that. One of them is using kind of relationship capital. Like, look, we are both in this relationship. There are things that I have been carrying that are really troubling for me or are hard for me to work through. I'm going to get my own therapy, and I really want you to do it for me. Even if you don't want to do it for yourself, this is a way that I need you to show up in this relationship. So you make it less about, thumbs up or down for therapy, and more about show your commitment to me by doing something that may not feel entirely initially comfortable for you. And the other thing that we can do is sort of put some boundaries on what we are initially agreeing to. So it might just be, I need you to do, to meet with 3 different therapists and pick which one you like best. I will find the 3, you can pick the, so you give them agency. Or you can say, if you will meet with somebody for 5 times, then I will leave this alone. You've gave it a try. So we kind of look for structural ways and also different kind of motivational ways to try to move that agreement down the road.
That makes a lot of sense. I like that. Put a number to it.
Yeah.
So here's another question from our audience, Angela. If I'm a stay-at-home mom, should I ask for allowance? What am I, 5? But it's our money.
Yeah. I think, well, I would hope that you don't have to, you don't really feel like you're in a position where you have to ask for that. And I think you're not asking, you don't need someone's permission. Like, you are working, you're a partner and a member of this household. I wonder if, again, borrowing from some of what Amanda is talking about, is making that a thing that you talk about in partnership. And it's about, like, what are we saying yes to, right? Like, and talking about what the priorities are, and, like, to keep the house. Sometimes people need to really be shown, like, I think I definitely went through periods of my life where I was like, don't you know what I want and what I need? And it's sort of painful to realize, like, sometimes you have to be really explicit. It feels a little bit unromantic, but maybe you say, like, maybe I don't think you realize that this is how much this costs. You know what I mean? For me to get that cheese you like, right? Or for us to have, like, the nice beans or whatever, like, this is how much that costs. And maybe we could talk about looking at our budget again. But yeah, you are not 5. You are not a child. Like, you are an adult with needs, and your household has needs, and all of those things are just as important as any work that goes on outside of the household. And so I think you should absolutely open a discussion about it.
Okay, that's good advice. And so when thinking about, certainly the pandemic has put things into perspective for a lot of folks who are either unhappy with their job, feeling maybe unfulfilled, feeling just, the demands on top of everything else are too much. A lot of women especially are turning to the flexibility of looking for options that may involve them starting their own business or turning their side hustle into more of a main hustle. But there are some financial implications to this, for sure, that we have to consider. So I want to go again to Lisa Greene-Lewis, who's a CPA and tax expert with TurboTax, who's going to remind us of some of these important considerations when you're thinking about leaving the 9 to 5 and bringing the side hustle to the front burner. Here she is.
One thing you should think about is how you're transitioning into it. If you're going to keep your W-2 job and work your side job, or you're going to fully jump into self-employment, because your W-2 income and getting your self-employment income, that could have tax implications. Another thing to think about is whether you're working a side gig, you are self-employed. So if you make a net income of $400, you have to file your self-employment taxes. But it doesn't have to be a bad thing, because self-employed, you get so many tax deductions for expenses directly related to your business. So you definitely don't want to forget those, because you have the opportunity to lower your taxable income. So just think about any marketing expenses, advertising, your home office is a big one, or, the expenses for your car, if you're driving to appointments or whether you're shipping something, those are definitely all valid expenses for you.
So yeah, sounds like there's a lot to think about when it comes to sort of making this plan for, on or off ramping from a full-time job to a more, entrepreneurial situation. But Amanda, can that really be fulfilling and sort of lead to maybe a more invigorated relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm all for taking things that aren't working. And even if you're not sure that the solution is perfect, sometimes the best we can do is to just focus on trying to solve the problem that's right in front of us. And so if we think that flexibility and having more agency and control over our job and our work is something that's going to make life better, then I would say, by all means, let's definitely test that case. I encourage people to explore and take risks and not make everything feel so pass or fail. And when we are more fulfilled, I do think that creates energy in other parts of our lives. Where I would maybe also suggest that people take a look is that if you are starting your own business, we think of the benefits in terms of all of the other responsibilities, caretaking responsibilities, et cetera. But like, what if the business is really successful to the point where it starts to create some of the exact same sort of labor tensions that you had before? Are you still going to be committed to the business? How would you want to see your spouse support you and support this business? Like, these are things that couples should talk about ahead of time and not assume that every play is going to be a small play. Think big.
Great point. You could hit it out of the park and be like so busy, right?
Yes.
Amazing. I like that way of thinking. Well, we are almost out of time. I feel like we could have kept talking about this for another hour because there's so much ground to cover, because all of these three things are so interconnected. But I want to let you know that our next episode of Live, Work, Thrive will be on April 5th, and it is called The Shape of You, Raising Girls to Love Their Bodies. Join us by signing up at scarymommy.com/live, work, thrive. Also, call us on our hotline. You know, I love the hotline, people. Okay. Give us your questions, give us your show suggestions, compliment Angela on her hair, which we were all just chatting about earlier. That looks amazing.
Dedicated line for that.
Yes. This is the dedicated number, the praise for Angela's hair at 1-800-422-3910. Hit us up with all of your comments and suggestions there. So thank you to our incredible panelists, Angela Garbes. Pick up her book, pre-order it. It comes out in May, but you can pre-order it now. Essential Labor, Mothering as Social Change. Support her work. We love to hear everything you have to say. Come back and talk to us when your book is on the market, Angela. And Amanda, financial therapist.
Write a book.
Who you get going, Amanda.
I need your book, Amanda.
Slacking. You're clearly slacking. If you would like to hear more from her, you can, of course, check out the Death, Sex, and Money podcast on WNYC with several episodes featuring Amanda Clayman. Also, thank you to Lisa Greene-Lewis, tax expert, CPA with TurboTax. I mean, I need to hand off my taxes to someone like Lisa, please, because now TurboTax Live lets you literally do it at home in your pajamas. That is my kind of accounting, people, I tell you. So thank you both for being with us tonight. I want to say thank you to everyone out there watching. Have a great night, Scary Mommies. Like I said, money, sex, and happiness, they're all in short supply, especially after kids. But just because we have kids, like we've heard tonight, doesn't mean we don't deserve to win in all areas, right? Let's make a pledge. Let's make a plan, be strategic, and get that expert advice we need so that we can all live, work, and thrive. Good night, everyone.
Bye.